until 23, like I said, I was lazy. Apart from my jobs that I was doing, I wasn't going to uni. I wasn't really like learning stuff. I was just reading it the night before, passing an exam, going out drinking, partying. Like,
AKA the anxious investor.
This ain't the way to do it. This ain't the way to get rich. This ain't the way to get wealthy just through a 9 to 5. And that really changed my whole mindset in terms of, I realized how many gifts we are given, absolutely, like that we take for granted. I just started from a normal family. We were very poor growing up. That taught me a lot. I learned a lot from growing up without nothing, but I had a very happy childhood.
Do you think it's worth getting into property at this stage or where we currently are?
I'd say no.
On today's episode of the Inkspired Man podcast, we're joined by Aaron, aka the anxious investor on social media. He's a property investor, business owner, and a content creator enthusiast. But his life wasn't always like this. Until his mid-20s, he was stuck at an unfulfilling corporate job, not knowing what to do with his life until he started his self-improvement journey by reading over 350 books. We dove more into why he chose to get into the property game, how he overcame anxiety and became more mentally strong, where he's invested right now apart from property, how having a partner in life and business helps, how he manages multiple businesses simultaneously, and a lot more. So without further ado, I'm Jatz, and this is the Inkspired Man podcast. Quick one before we get started, I have a small favor to ask of you guys. 79.7% of you are watching the videos but have not subscribed yet. In order to help me bring you guys bigger guests, if you have learned anything from any of the podcast, please subscribe to this channel. Thank you and enjoy this episode. I think we're going to start the podcast by simply first going deeper into your journey. So thank you for joining on the podcast today. I think this is our second podcast. The first one was in 2020. For everyone new around here, let's just start off this podcast by kind of going in your journey and where the anxious investor was born. Fantastic. Or the environment you were grown in.
Of course. Firstly, thank you for having me the second time. I think last time we did it on Zoom. Was it during COVID?
Yes, it was during COVID.
It might have been, yeah. So an awesome setup as well, by the way. So my journey is quite random, to be honest. It's as random as my name, the anxious investor. That kind of just spun out from nowhere as well. Two sides to that. I struggle with anxiety. Maybe a conversation for today, maybe not. And then the investing side, I'm heavily involved in property investing. In terms of where I started, I just started from a normal family. We were very poor growing up. That taught me a lot. I learned a lot from growing up without nothing, but I had a very happy childhood. So probably like my relationship with money isn't probably what you'd expect, I suppose. I was an academic at school. I learned a lot of stuff very quickly. I had this thing, I call it a gift and a curse, where I could look at something and I could remember it straight away. So when it came to exams, I'd pass every exam, but I wouldn't understand it. So like the next day, if it was ever about explaining what I've learned, I had no idea what it was. But it made me pass all my exams. I went to grammar school, got a degree, got a diploma, got a master's. And I always thought that coming from a poor background, if I just got my education right, I'd be rich. You know, I'd have a fancy car, have a nice house, and I could do all the things that I want to do. Then very quickly in my mid-20s, I'd probably say I'm a little bit older than you. Then I started realizing that this ain't the way to do it. This ain't the way to get rich. This ain't the way to get wealthy just through a 9 to 5. Unless, of course, you've got an amazing job, which is obviously like the top 1%. So then I started learning about investing and then almost had to unlearn everything that I had learned for the first 25 years, which was difficult. Yeah. Like even in terms of mindset, I know you're big on personal development. So I read 350 books. I started doing like training courses, webinars, really trying to change everything. And coming from an academic perspective, I always thought education was the way. So I had to kind of unlearn that as well. And then it was kind of like a sunk cost fallacy where you spent so much time learning so much stuff. And then you're like, I have to scrap that now and restart again. So this is one of the reasons I kind of put my content out there, because I'm like, rather than go through what I've been through, just miss those 10 years and, get it right. So property was my vehicle that I chose in terms of like investment. It did well for me. I made a lot of mistakes. I lost a lot of money in the first few years. I'm at a point now where like my wife's pretty much retired out of her job as a pharmacist. I've been self-employed for the last 4 or 5 years. And now it's kind of giving me freedom to do stuff like, I want a podcast room as cool as this. I want to get my YouTube game up, and just the stuff that we like to do. Yeah. Even as content creators, there's a level of, if you can help someone and then they've taken that piece of content and changed something, whether it's Amazon for yourself or they bought a house by watching my videos. There's no better feeling than that. So
100%.
That's kind of where I'm moving towards.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. And I think your journey will resonate or must be resonating with a lot of people, because I think we kind of have the same background. Like, we come from not having anything. So
Absolutely.
the value for money for us is enormous compared to most people. And I think I've learned to take that as I did briefly say, but like an unfair advantage for myself, that in a way it's helped me a lot. But I want to go back to where you first said that you're a big investor in property. Now, there are many businesses out there. What made you choose property itself?
So I've never considered myself to be an entrepreneur or start a business. I always thought you either born with it or you're not. And then when I learnt the growth mindset, I realized you can become great at anything over a long enough period of time if you work hard enough. So it was actually at a funeral, my uncle's funeral, and I sat with my cousin, who I thought, and this isn't no disrespect because he's an amazing person, I didn't think he was that educated. Remember, I've got the degrees, I've got the masters. I should be the most intelligent one. Yet I found out in that time he was kind of semi-retired, and he could have retired if he wanted. So when I asked him that question, like, how did you do that? He was like, I invest in property. I've got a lot of properties. He had a portfolio. And I was like, that's interesting. Like, I'm sure I can learn that. I've been able to learn everything else. So that's actually what sparked the interest in property. I rang my mum, rang my dad, got my wife together. And then I booked onto some property course, some training. We were in London. Went to the webinars for like 3 days. They sold me the dream. I was going to be really rich in 12 months. And it kind of started my journey. Now, if you watch a lot of my videos, I'm kind of against that side of it. But I will say the one positive was it made me take action. It made me at least dive into that world of understanding property. And then, the last probably 10, 11 years, it's been since I've been buying properties, selling them, renovating them, all that sort of stuff. It's really changed my life, and it's changed my whole perspective. So I think it could have been anything. I just realized very quickly that a 9 to 5 wasn't it. And even podcasting, we spoke just before we went live on here. I had a very successful podcast that if I know what I know now, I could have probably monetized, and that could have potentially been my vehicle if I chose it. But yeah, property, I understand it. I understand the numbers. I understand over a long enough period of time, it's always going to go up in value. You're always going to need a house, for example. So that's kind of what drove me into it. But I'm not one of those enthusiasts that you probably see as well.
It's like,
online.
You should do property.
Yeah, I'm like, if you like it, do it. Like, it's a great vehicle in terms of, but it's slow. And it's not as great as like, some people would think, oh, if you got 2 or 3 properties, you must be really rich. You don't actually make a lot of money per month. Yeah, the cash flow is not great. But if you sit on it for 20, 30 years time, and I always try and think again like an investor, every move I make, I'm making a move 30 years ahead, and then I'm coming backwards. So it's almost 2023 is a year of cash flow for me and my wife. So now what we're doing is working on parts of our business where we're making more cash flow per month in terms of like to upgrade our living standards. But prior to that, we literally lived like students, invested all our wealth, knowing that in 20, 30 years time, we could retire, we could do whatever we want. And, kids and stuff, that they'll have a better start than say you and I had financially when we were growing up. Because growing up, we never had a house. So buying a house was always the one thing that I wanted more than anything. And now it's like managed to get enough houses that I'm like, I've kind of done well there.
I think when it comes to property, I've spoken to many people about property itself. And I'm in the process right now to getting my first ever house.
Good man.
And so I look at it more from an emotional perspective, like it's the first house, it's a sense of security, this and that. But most people say, oh, you're young, you should not get a property. And I think it's a bit of a weird one there. And also the part where you said about seminars. And then, my first ever side hustle, if you want to call it, or the first ever thing I wanted to go into was property.
Okay.
So I went to the most known crash course in the world. 2 days crash course, I went to that as well. And I think in a way, that is what boosted me as well, because it allowed me to see that, okay, these people are rich, but they're not even as smart as me. How the hell is that possible?
Absolutely.
So I think that was definitely a booster. Now, someone who's brand new to kind of this property game, do you think it's worth getting into property at this stage or where we currently are?
I'd say no. And that's quite controversial because I know, especially property trainers or gurus, they're going to sell you that get involved now. And that's mainly to line their own pockets. Like I always say with all my videos, if you don't like property, don't watch it. But you'll learn stuff that people are charging you thousands for absolutely free. The reason I say it's probably not the greatest time, and this ain't for yourself. If yours is an emotional purchase, it's a residential, for example, that's completely different. I'm talking about investing properties, slightly different. I think the market, we're at the top of the market, at least for this phase. You know, property normally works in 18-year cycles. So I'd be very surprised if the prices just continue to rise. I know they're well in the long enough period, but I think some sort of correction is inevitable. I think cost of living, inflation, interest rates, there's so many things in the pot that are almost boiling up to what you would assume would at least have some sort of correction in prices. So I think what was a deal 6 months ago for an investor, somebody potentially looking to buy a house, might not be a deal today. Mainly because, you know, the pound's weaker, for example, you're paying more on the rate, so the overall interest is more. What I would say though, as I've done in the last 10 years in terms of investing property, there's always an opportunity as well. So when things are bad, there are opportunities. So what we've done is we've pivoted our business towards serviced apartments. So, you know, when you buy an apartment or you rent an apartment off a landlord, and then you essentially rent that on Airbnb, Booking.com, or to contractors. So a cash flow game. So the goal for us now is, rather than acquire properties, because we're getting offered properties all the time, they're not making as much sense as they did 6 months ago. They're not hitting our ROI figures. So now we're thinking, actually, why don't we go for the service accommodation game, the hospitality space, which is always going to exist. People always want to have breaks, always contractors about. And that's actually booming at the minute for us. So there's less risk in terms of capital. You can leave within 3 months, worst case scenario. And that's actually doing really well. And what we're doing with those proceeds is saving it, because if there is a crash, that's when opportunities come. You know this better than anyone. Recessions, that's where you can buy stuff very cheap. So if you can sit on it and if you can make as much income as possible in the next 6 to 12 months, if you look at the wealthiest people in the world, you know, your Buffetts of the world, different level completely, but they're all sitting on a lot of cash now. And I think if you follow the big money, which is what I'm trying to do, you know, I'm a normal guy. I'm just trying to follow the big money, get whatever I can get together. And that maybe that 1 or 2 decisions I make in the next 12 to 24 months could change my life massively. So that's probably what I'd recommend. However, final point, just educate yourself in this time while we're going through this uncertainty. Just learn everything so that when you are ready to pull that trigger, you're not having to read the books, you're not having to watch the YouTube videos, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that was a very good answer in terms of like why you said no, and then you went to what is going to be the best opportunity most people will have in their lifetime. I think when it came to property, so I've been kind of pushing down this property thing since last year, right? So I'm like, oh yeah, prices will drop. And it's just not dropping. So now I'm at a point I'm not thinking, is it really going to drop? Like the amount of things happening, it should drop the prices. But for some reason, it's dropping by so less that I'm thinking, is it even really worth me waiting for it to drop? Because think about it, if I'm paying more interest right now, I mean, technically can equal out in terms of like my waiting game, paying the rent and stuff like that. So that's what I was thinking from the perspective as well. I think the service accommodation part is something really interesting to talk about here. What do you think? Why is that better right now compared to like, let's say HMO or lease options? I mean, lease options not different, but HMOs.
So I've done HMOs. I've done HMOs when you've converted a building into a HMO and then refinanced. I've done it where I've brought one that's already just, 4 or 5 tenants in there. HMOs, the reason I don't like them, and I know a lot of people like them, is you're just managing more people. So if one person leaves, you've got to get the right kind of tenant back in. There's a lot of moving parts to a HMO. If you don't have enough people within that particular property, you could, you lose your cash flow by getting rid of one person, for example. There's a lot of turnovers in my experience. Rents are always going to potentially go up. So I'm not saying HMO is a bad thing. The reason service accommodation works better is because you're not dealing with tenants. You're not dealing with those kind of problems. And we do it at the minute on a rent-to-rent basis with the hope of actually buying one in the future. So we were actually going to buy one at the end of this year, but again, interest rates just didn't make sense for us. So hopefully next year we'll actually acquire one and own it ourselves. But what works for us is you pay the landlord a deposit, you pay the first month's rent, for example, and then we know what we can make. We're ranked quite high in terms of Birmingham city centre, in terms of getting clients.
How much cash flow are you looking at?
Okay, so it's not as much as people would say. It can be anywhere between, this is net profit, say £500 to £1,000 is kind of across the board on average. Some months, I mean, when we had the Commonwealth, 1,500, 2,000 a month per property. So we've got loads of properties, like double digit properties we've got. But
They all are rent to rent.
They're all on rent to rent at the minute. But there are certain ones that will only make £300, for example. So if anyone's going to get into that, stay away from maybe 1-bedroom apartments. Try and stick to 2. You can just get more. And when you add guests on Airbnb and Booking.com, you can obviously add a little bit of a fee as well. So that's probably what we'd say. Again, during like the pandemic and stuff, it was difficult. So we had to get nurses and doctors in just to kind of cover our costs. But what's great is the initial capital isn't a lot. You can get most of your money out within, like, say 7 to 9 months, for example. And then you can break that clause if you need within 3 months. The only negative is the landlord can take it back as well.
Yeah.
Within 3 years.
Where do you find this? Do you think landlords will just be happy for you to like use their property as a hotel type thing?
So that's a great question. So a lot of people just ask that. I've been a landlord for over 11 years. If you say to me, I will guarantee you rent and I would take it off your hands for 3 years, mate, you can have all my properties. Because I don't want the hassle. So I know there's a lot of people out there like myself. So all they want as a landlord, all we want is our rent paid, peace of mind, look after the property, that's it. So most of the time we return the properties in better conditions to the landlords because all the furniture and stuff that we get, we're like, just keep it. There's no point because we want to upgrade it for the next one. So it's about solving their pain points. So when you speak to a landlord, a lot of landlords make mistakes. Like they'll try and get too much rent, for example. If you've listed something, let's say, for example, £1,000, but the market rate is 800, by leaving it on an advertising agency, for example, for 2 months, you've instantly messed up your cash flow for the year. So just take less, but get it over 12 months and you're earning more essentially. So what we say is guaranteed, apart from the electrics and the boiler, which is obviously their responsibility, we'll make sure the house is, the flat, is returned in the same condition essentially. And that's it really. It's actually not that hard. I mean,
how much would a normal person need? Would you think that's one of the best ways to get into property right now?
I think so, yeah. I think as long as you're okay with getting rejected, because you're going to get rejected a lot, you probably need to have like good people skills in terms of just building rapport with an agent or with a landlord. And you need some skill set. It's not as easy as, okay, let's imagine I take over this property now and I just take some photos and put it on Airbnb. It's not that simple. Obviously you got to make it nice so somebody looks at it. It's a bit like what we spoke about YouTube, like the thumbnail. So your photos are really important. When anyone books a hotel or anything like that, they're always looking at the photos. So that's important. But then you've got to know what your price point is. So you've got to make sure initially when we start, for the first month or so, the price is lower just to get people coming in. Then you got to try and get reviews. If you can get a couple of reviews initially, that will boost you up. So how do you incentivize people to do a review? Maybe say, if you come back, you get 20% off, for example, if you leave us a review. We have to do loads of little marketing tricks like that. Then obviously if your network increases, then you can get contractors in. So there's loads of ways you can do it. It just takes a lot of work. It's more of a business than like a strategy. But if you put the work in now, you can probably get to like 10 properties within 6 months. Then you're looking at what, 500 to that. Yeah, you're earning quite a bit. And then obviously as with the business, you can offset a lot against it as well. Start saving that money and then acquire a property. Because if you own a property then you have full control. A landlord can't just say after 3 years, I want my property back. You own it.
And higher cash flow.
Absolutely. You got the cash flow and your mortgage is going to be most likely less than what you're paying the landlord.
Yeah, the rent.
Yeah. So that's probably what I'd recommend at the minute. But yeah, there's always opportunities. Commercial conversions are really good. It's a bit more high tech, a bit more advanced. That's something that I'd recommend people look into. Lease options, you mentioned, a great way. I think lease options, I said this on my last video, is going to be a great strategy if we have a wobble in the market. People will end up in negative equity. So somebody struggling potentially, you could control their property, cover their mortgage payments, cash flow off the back of it, and then offer them a price where you might buy it in a later date.
I think that really makes sense for people who don't have much money to get started. And I think when it comes to property, what I've realized is that most people think it's so easy and that's why they get into it. Example, that's why you get into it. And then you realize that it's not that easy. Just like every business, it requires a lot of time, effort and dedication. And I think that's the reason why most people don't do it. Now I want to move away from the property for a while and go into the direction of like the other things you're doing, such as the Health Excel brand you have and you YouTube, and then you do so many other things. Like you do so many things. So do you think if you focused all your time in, I'm not going to put it that way. I'm going to say, why do you focus all your time in multiple things?
I get bored easily. I get bored very, very easily.
That's the same answer I give to everyone. Okay. I think that's so important. Because I always think that you can put all your time in one thing and you can grow that. But I think it's like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
It's so much boredom in just focusing on one thing. So
I resonate with that. Me and my wife were talking about this actually, because we were talking about some of the greatest entrepreneurs in the world. We're like, they're so laser focused on one thing, hence why they get to where they get to. And I think when I first started personal development, I almost thought, I want to be the next Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. We all have that belief that we can become, that rich dad. We can do like amazing stuff. And then all of a sudden I was like, actually, I don't want to become that person. What I actually want to do, my level of, let's say, success or happiness comes from, do I have choice in the stuff that I do every day? And then when that happens, I realize, similar to yourself, I don't just want to focus just on Health Excel or just on property. I want to be able to do other stuff where, I love trying stuff. Podcasting. I was a very shy person. I never used to do podcasts. I was too shy to put myself on camera, for example. I always like to test myself. So I just try new stuff. And then I'll see something and I'm like, that looks interesting. TikTok, end up on TikTok, following you on there. Then now YouTube, I just like that challenge of doing different things. And right now, YouTube's one of my favorite hobbies. Will it be in 3 or 4 months, 3 years? Who knows? But I think as long as, you put effort into it and you realize that whatever you do is going to be difficult. Because there's always a journey, even like with property to everything. But yeah, I don't think I'd ever do one thing all the time. Unless it was play football, and I'm too old for that right now.
I mean, you're a great footballer. I recently, just going to go aside on that. Recently had a football tournament. They kept me as a striker, trained for like 2 months in a row, scored 0 goals. And I couldn't even take my team to the semis. We went to the quarters, but couldn't take it to the semis. But yeah, so. Did
you lay any on? Did you? Any assists?
No.
Okay.
I was trying to take that from the person who did give the assist, because I gave it to him. He gave it to the keeper.
So you were somewhere
I was somewhere there. But yeah. So I think that kind of didn't really go well. But you really speak a lot more about mental health and like as you mentioned in the start, anxiety and everything you faced. How do you as an entrepreneur or a business owner take care of your mental health? Because that's one thing which everyone struggles with, and myself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so I never knew I had, let's call it ill mental health, because everyone has mental health to some level, until I was about my mid-20s. And I used to think I was just shy. I was an introvert. You learn different stuff as you're reading more stuff. And then I realized I actually struggle with anxiety, which I don't wish on anyone, because it's crippling. It saps your energy. You're overthinking 24/7. And I think when we're on social media, something you can probably relate to, as great as social media is for what we do, it's also a very horrible place. So when that comes in and you get that horrible side of somebody having a really bad day and then just spewing nonsense at you, it does take a toll on your mental health. So what I realized probably 10 years ago, I saw my mum go through chronic depression. First time ever heard of the word depression, mental health. And I think especially in Asian culture, it's quite taboo back then anyway, to speak about mental health. It's like, just get over it. What have you got to worry about? All that sort of stuff. So I obviously see my mum change as a person. I started researching into it and trying to understand, like, why is my mum acting this way? Why is she randomly upset? And then I started researching it, started understanding it. Then I was like, I get some of these feelings. I get some of these emotions. Through research, some of the stuff that I do, gratitude is obviously a great one. A lot of people say that. It's
hard to do, but it's
hard.
Important.
Yeah, it's important. And I always find with that, it doesn't always work for me, if I'm being completely honest with it. Because when you're feeling low, just saying, I should be grateful I've got a brother or a mom or a dad, it just doesn't work, right? At least for myself, it doesn't. So things that do work is when you struggle with anxiety, it's the lack of control and uncertainty, is then to control the controllables. So what I then able to do is, we speak about this like gym. Gym is something you can control irrespective of your emotion. So you could be having a really bad day, and sometimes you can have a good day, but when you're in the gym, it's just something that you can do. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but sometimes you could have a bad day, go to the gym and absolutely crush it, and vice versa. Sometimes you could feel good and go to the gym and think, why am I so weak today? It's so random. But gym's something I control. I try and listen to something a bit more uplifting. So like Eric Thomas, Tom Billy, some just entrepreneurs that I relate to, that I think they're going to send me a message that will just reinforce something in my behavior. That helps. And music, I just think is, at least for myself, I brought myself a guitar in COVID, learned a couple of songs. And I just find when I have music on, it just separates me from the world. And then I'm not overthinking about stuff. So those are things that I do. I think people need to find what works for them. But it's, again, putting yourself in a position where you can control the controllables, never neglecting your mental health. So your nutrition is so important, your hydration, your sleep. We know this better than anyone. We probably work 16, 18 our days without realizing. And sometimes we're like, I haven't even eaten today, for example.
Yeah.
Like when I used to hear that growing up, I think Beyonce wrote a story about it, or she's quoted it, that she worked so many days without eating. I just think, how do you forget to eat? Because I love food, right? But then when you're fully involved in businesses.
When you love something more than food.
Absolutely. That's it. That's absolutely it. And then you forget that. So you have to focus on your sleep. Your sleep's so important. You have to focus on obviously nutrition. And then I just think, as you know, when you exercise, releases endorphins, it helps with your mental clarity as well. I also find I'm more creative. So running, I don't like running. I don't like cardio. But when I run, every TikTok idea comes in my head. And I'm almost like, hey Siri, I'm trying to speak to Siri while I'm running. I'm trying to give my ideas. Yeah, taking notes. And when I read it afterwards, I'm like, what the hell was I saying? But yeah, that's probably what I'd recommend to people. I think, especially for your day and age as well, you come just slightly a generation below me where social media is massive. Yeah. When I went to university, we didn't have social media. We didn't have camera phones, nothing. It was just, a phone was to call someone or text someone. Yeah, I think it was, because even when you're out, you don't have the fear of somebody recording you or, you know, if somebody falls over or something. Nowadays, it's all over social media. Yeah. It was a lot carefree. So I do sympathize.
More in terms of also comparing yourself, because I think the biggest problem in social media, which I feel, is people compare easily. Like they will compare their first day to my 100th day and they'll be like, oh, why am I not in that same level? Or even in terms of beauty, like you're like, oh, that person looks so much better than me, and your self-esteem, and kind of it drains you so much. And so I think the choices we make is also a big factor to just getting your mindset right. But I think all the tips you have just provided, including gym, is something I learned from you mainly when we had that conversation, and how you helped me to kind of get onto that fitness journey as well. So I think that's really helped me become a lot more kind of less burnt out. So I used to burn out so much and very often, I think because it's that typical entrepreneur feeling, the guilt feeling. So that's what kind of made me feel that way. But I think in terms of someone who's, let's say, facing anxiety on a daily basis right now, and you could say they can go to the gym, but they can't just get something going. What would be the first thing they should kind of do to kind of just figure out and get out of that space?
So yeah, if you're in a massive funk, that's what I call it. I call that episode of funk, because I do get those days where even get to the gym is struggle. I think letting your loved ones know. So like my wife, she struggles with anxiety as well. So when we first ever spoke about it, it was like, oh, me too, which actually helped, because then you can understand where someone's coming from. Yeah. So letting your loved ones know, because if you're not responsive to like texts or phone calls, for example, then it really does start with the simplest stuff. Like, what are you consuming? Are you waking up anxious and then watching the news where you're hearing really bad stuff straight away? Or are you going on social media and then comparing yourself? So stop certain things, just stop those habits. And then water, I always keep a pint of water by my bedside table. As soon as I wake up, I try and have like 2 or 3 pints of water just to start the day, because you're massively dehydrated. So that just helps with my level of thinking and just, you know, start the day clear. Caffeine, a lot of people, it affects people differently. It doesn't affect me that much, but when I used to work with people, sometimes that would make them jittery. So maybe not have caffeine straight away, because your cortisol is already raised anyway when you first wake up. So it's little habits, but what you need to do is know these habits before you're in that funk, so that when they do happen, you can kind of think, okay, I know I'm struggling now. This will pass. And this is what I always tell myself. This episode will pass. I will feel better tomorrow. However, for now, which of these on this list, and say you got 5 things, can I control now? Yeah. And then just choose one of them. Don't overwhelm yourself. Be kind to yourself. Because another thing is, you might feel this as well. We're probably really harsh on ourselves.
We always are.
Always are. So when somebody's even critical to me online, they don't realize I'm that person times 10 to myself. Yeah. Like, I don't need you telling me what I need to improve. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I think that's something I'm trying to do now, you know, in my 30s, is just be kinder to myself. Like, if I don't get my 100 things to do done, it's okay. You know,
I just want to know, as a person who's older than me, what's the difference between how the way you think in your 20s to your 30s?
So different, honestly. It's
are there any regrets, or are there any kind of things you wish you'd done in your 20s, or you were like that, which could have helped you in your 30s? Or there were some dumb things you were doing in your 20s, thinking wise, that you think was so dumb as well?
Well, firstly, I've said this to you before. I think you should be very proud of where you are in terms of like your progress and everything that you've done. It inspires me, like seeing you and seeing like young creators and stuff. No, honestly, I mean that, because like you've done amazing. Because my personal development journey didn't start till 25. So that's even after you. So you've learned some of the stuff that I was learning in my 30s or in my late 20s. So I think the younger generation has the ability now to just go on YouTube and learn something very, very quickly. I'm not saying we didn't have that. We just didn't do it. Social media wasn't a big part of our lives growing up. But what I realized was when you first start reading personal development books, at least this was myself, after reading 3 or 4 books, you think you're the cleverest guy in the world. You're like, I know everything.
I'll be honest, I'll just pause you there.
Yeah.
I read like 8 books in personal development. I'm like, I know it all now. I don't have to read more. Yeah. And then just like past few months, I've started reading again. I'm like, I'm so stupid. How much there's more to learn.
That's the difference. Absolutely. So you hit the nail on the head there. So you think you're a genius as you start reading, and then the more you read and the more you grow and the more things you try, the more you realize the less you know.
Yes.
So now at 350 plus books, I feel there's too much to learn. I'm so far behind. So then that becomes a little bit overwhelming. But then what I say with that is, now I just focus on the stuff that I need to do in terms of, okay, I've got 350 books somewhere in here, but I know that I need to learn a lot more, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's interesting how you have that dynamic of thinking you're so smart and then all of a sudden realizing, no, the more I learn, the less I actually know.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
That makes sense. Oh, did it turn off? The thing is, when I'm podcasting, sometimes I have this thing where I go somewhere else and then I bring my mind back into it.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. So I think that's not to worry about. Cool. But now, from where we were just speaking about personal development, I want to more dive into like were you born with this mindset of like just having the hunger to do stuff? Because some people have this entrepreneurial mindset, some people just don't, no matter how many books they read and this and that. Or did you think your one evolved as you read more books?
I think mine definitely evolved. I think I was quite lucky growing up. So when I grew up, I was quite popular at school. Everything I did, I kind of picked it up quite well. So I was really good at sports. I was really good academically. So I never really struggled. The moment I struggled was when I went to grammar school, and I went from being top at everything to bottom at everything, because kids are so much smarter than you.
Yeah.
They've had like more extracurricular activities than you, for example, because they've had more money, for example. And then that really knocked my confidence in terms of, I was used to always being top.
Yeah.
So when you're all of a sudden at the bottom, I actually struggled with that. Like I needed an arm around my shoulder when I look back now and think. So that I struggled a little bit there. And I remember my nan used to say, when I went to uni, she used to worry that I couldn't make a piece of toast because I used to be really lazy. She was like, I worry he's going to starve and he's not even going to make himself toast. That was like the story, the narrative. So I was quite a lazy person. However, growing up financially poor, I had to get a job. So although I was lazy, I always still worked. I always worked from the age of 15. As many jobs as I could. I worked through university, sales jobs, petrol stations, worked in a factory. I've done all the jobs, toilet packing, everything. So I had to work to obviously help at home as well. So I worked, but every time I worked, it was always a big effort. It was always like, do I have to do this kind of thing? But I would still get it done, because at the end of the day, I'm never going to see my family struggle in terms of like finances. Then what happened is, as I started to get older, we had a massive change in our family. So my family actually fostered children. So I've got foster siblings. My younger sister's adopted. And when they came into our life, they've got like ADHD, autism, and they've got certain elements in their behavior that will stop them being able to do stuff that we're doing now. For example, driving a car. My younger brother Carl can't drive a car, for example. He'll never be able to drive a car. Communication, he may not be able to communicate the way that you and I are communicating now. And that really changed my whole mindset in terms of, I realized how many gifts we are given, absolutely, like that we take for granted. The ability to speak, to listen, to drive a car, to go on a date with somebody. So many things that, we take for granted. And I think when they came into my life, it massively gave me a wake up call. And at this point, this was when I was 25. I remember I was actually working in West London, Shepherd's Bush Way. And I actually had to move away from home. So I was living in a hotel, and I started thinking like, how lucky am I? Like all these opportunities I have. And that really did like put a rocket on my backside, essentially. And then from that day, I started grounding myself with looking back. And when I look back and I think, how hard did my mom have to work? She used to work 80, 90 hours a week. And I was like, well, actually, hard work can take you pretty far. We were never given anything. So again, it was all these kind of lessons that actually molded me. And that's why I say in my last 10 years, if I'd known this earlier, I think I would have been so much further along. But again, everyone's journey is different. And that's why when I see you guys doing it, I'm like, you guys are going to be amazing. Like when you're my age sitting on this side of the chair, like the stuff that you would have achieved will be incredible. And that's why I love like trying to share stuff, because I'm always trying to fast track people's lives, if that makes sense. And I know not everybody wants to hear it from me or somebody else, but I'm thinking even if I can just save you 5 or 10 years, you know, we're only here for a short amount of time.
I think I completely agree with that as well. And I think the reason why I find it interesting to hear from someone who's older than me, because I'm young, but I feel like life, I'm so old, but I'm not. And that's why like your thought process of how you think and stuff is important for me, because I feel like that kind of helps me slow down as well. And enjoy the moments. And because I'm always in a fast track lane every single day. So I think
are you enjoying the moments?
A lot more now compared to how I started in 2020, 2021. My mind was exhausted. I'll be always living in the future. I'll be always aiming for the next goal, the next target, this, that. And that helped me in a way to grow so fast and get the stuff which I wanted to get to. But in a way, it also was bad. 2 ways. One was mentally, and second way was sometimes you start looking for shortcuts, and in the long run, that's never a good thing. And so that's something I realized as well. But I think this year, I have been able to, well, not this year, since June, I've been able to take it a lot more easy and be in the present. Because I think people don't understand the importance of just living in the moment, and whatever happens, it's going to happen. Who knows?
No, absolutely. You mentioned earlier about my 20s to my 30s and about regrets. I've got no regrets, because my 20s was, my early 20s was I was still at university. I was still enjoying life. Like I was so present in my 20s. And there is an element of like trying to live in that future and work so much. But I'd hate for you, like having all the success that you've achieved now and all the things you got going on, to not sit back when you're in your 30s and think, I really enjoyed that. I wouldn't want you to be like, actually, I should have changed stuff. So really, if it means, you know, you get there 2 or 3 years later, but you've enjoyed the moment, that's important. Again, it's about being kind to ourselves and having days off. Like today, I've come down. Tomorrow, we've taken the day off. I still get anxiety, like I should be working, I should still be doing something. But, you know, I've worked so hard to get here, and you've worked so hard, so consistently at 23. I mean, up until 23, like I said, I was lazy. Apart from my jobs that I was doing, I wasn't going to uni. I wasn't really like learning stuff. I was just reading it the night before, passing an exam, going out drinking, partying. Like I wasn't focused. Like I was all over the place. But at the same time, I wouldn't change those years because I enjoyed them. So I think for yourself, if you can find some balance, you'll be much happier from a mental perspective.
And I think we had a conversation about this as well when we first spoke. And so I've been applying those things, and I think it also allowed me to know that the reason why I was a lot more happier before I got into this entrepreneurial world, even though it's so kind of controversial me saying this, but it's because back then I was always living in the moment, enjoying. And as they say, kids enjoy their life a lot more because they're in the present. They're never stressed about past, future, or whatever. They're in the moment. So that's really helped me a lot. But one other thing I want to talk about is that you're married. So as an entrepreneur, is it difficult to kind of sometimes balance your spending time with the other half and then spending time on? Because I feel like the reason why I'm getting to know this, because I don't know, right now I'm spending almost 12, 14 hours just working. And I'm like, how will I give enough time? Not that I don't want to give time, but it's just that I enjoy doing this thing so much as well.
Of course. That's a great question. So firstly, I'll just say, sometimes we are working 16 hours, me and my wife, next to each other. So she'll have a laptop, I'll have mine. But it feels like we haven't seen each other all day, or we haven't spoken. Sometimes we'll go to bed and we're like, you're right. And that's the first time we've actually spoken the day. So it can still be distant even though we're together. So obviously when I first invested in property, the goal was to get her out of work. So she now just does voluntary 1 day a week that she likes to do, she chooses to do. So we do work together 7 days a week, pretty much at home, 6-7 days. I'd say we're lucky because when we first got married, again, we both kind of had a fixed mindset. She was a pharmacist. I'd got my degree. We always thought, both got 9 to 5s, we'll be happy. And then I started this personal development journey, and I'm very grateful and very fortunate that she kind of embraced it as well. So what I was doing was, when I took her to that property event, or when I took her to a seminar, she'd come along with me and she'd listen. And she's very intelligent, so she kind of understood everything. And then we kind of almost was like, we could do this. We could get this life where we dictate what we do. So it was actually a conscious decision that she was like, why don't you go into property full time? I'll stay at work for a bit. And then once you do well in property, I'll come out of work. And then hence Health Excel, we essentially started our business. So I was very fortunate that we had that relationship. So I think something for yourself, I'm not giving you marriage advice here, by the way, but one of my best mates is as an entrepreneur. Because one of my best mates is in the same position. And he had this same anxiety because he loves his work. He loves the stuff he does. And it was, you now need to find a partner who can accept that this is part of your life. Like Jatz is an entrepreneur, and an entrepreneur means long hours. It means sometimes when you say, I want a holiday, we're thinking, well, that's a week of work. And do you know what I mean? Like all those are the things that come with it. And if you can find someone who will be supportive, but then compliment you. So I'm very, I'd say like scatterbrain. My brain's all over the place. I'm trying to do like 100 things at once. And I'm more creative and visionary. My wife's very pragmatic and she's organized. So like she'll keep everything ticking along how it should be.
It's basically your weakness is the strength she
Absolutely.
has.
And vice versa. So it works really, really well. Yeah. So I'm fortunate. I have no complaints. Obviously as well, when I started property for the first 4 years, people think entrepreneurship or property or whatever it is fun because you only see the fun side. It's a lonely game sometimes. You know, you're by yourself and sometimes your thoughts aren't the greatest thoughts to be left with.
Yes.
When you've got no one else to talk to. So having her around, I can bounce them off, or we can almost have like therapy sessions, and that just helps us as well.
I think that's one reason why I always tell the guys that I want to get married early. Just sometimes I can have a therapy session, and I think that's really important as an entrepreneur. And I think that's a great study. I'm sure, I don't know if you've heard it from Jay Shetty, that men prefer to get electric shocked rather than staying alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. And that's a crazy study because I was trying to think, I'm like, can I stay 15 minutes with my thoughts? And I was like, I could, but that's going to drain me for like 2 hours or 3 hours of the entire day as well. From that conversation, now I want to shift into another amazing thing, which I've been also recently getting more into, is crypto. And I don't know if it's just me thinking this, but a lot of property investors are getting into crypto.
Yeah.
Do you think, is there some sort of kind of element which you guys as property investors see in crypto, which kind of normal people aren't able to see yet?
I think a lot of people get into it for the speculative profits that you can make, the 100x's, the 1000x's. I think that's just exciting. And to that extent, it's almost like gambling.
Yeah.
So I always say it's a bit like gambling because essentially you're gambling on startups or what companies say that they're going to do. In terms of relaying it to property, so we were actually starting something. Then obviously we've had this, I don't know if it's a bear market or whatever people want to call it. And it's kind of on the back burner because I was like, let's tokenize property because that could work. Because if you can't afford a property, we could tokenize it through things like NFTs, for example. So I understand why investors would think of that. Also, if you just use Bitcoin as a fundamental for what it is, the fundamental, of Bitcoin for what it is. Again, I'm not an expert on crypto, so I don't want to get slated in the comments, but it's scarce in terms of its supply. For example, we know that land is scarce. They're not building any more land. So from that perspective, could the value of it continue to go up if people perceive there to be value with it? The same as land, for example. So I understand some of the correlations as well. But I think what I realize is with property, to get a new deal, you need money.
Yeah. It's
normally a lot of money. So if everyone's money runs out at some stage, regardless of how rich you are. So unless you've got a pipeline of investors, for example, putting £1,000, £500 into crypto, it makes a bit more sense in that particular time. So I've done the same. You know, I sat there and I think this was like during the pandemic and I was like, I could potentially buy 2 or 3 houses, just standard buy to lets, or should I just go all in on crypto?
Yeah.
And I actually went all in on crypto. And when I did it, it actually went up and I was like 55 grand up within 3 months. I was like, this is brilliant. Like I should put more in. Didn't take no profits. And now I'm like 55 grand down, for example. So it literally just went all the way down. So I'm sitting on it now. Then what that has now done is forced me to understand it a little bit better. But it's where do you get the information from? Because one thing I'm realizing, and I could be completely wrong here, is I don't think anyone really knows what they're talking about that much.
I feel that too. There's some guys who are
better than others.
But the ones I'm talking about is that they're not the gurus for every coin. They study and are in one coin. Like there's one guy he's not that big on TikTok. I think his name's some Dark Horse something. He just talks about XRP And I hold a bit of XRP, so
same. Yeah, a lot.
a lot, definitely. So he's talking about XRP, and every single video he makes is literally makes sense, because not that I want to hear good things about XRP, but he kind of breaks down, reads the case, like the court case filings, this that. And I'm like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. But I think I understand why you would say, because most people like Bitcoin's going 100K and then it went to 16K.
Of course, it's all speculative. And the thing is, it's only going to go up or down. So you got 50-50 chance of getting it right. Yeah. I think another thing I thought about this actually, I was like, I reckon I could grow my TikTok quicker if I just spoke about XRP. Because XRP is actually one of the most popular crypto coins. Because it's almost like Marmite. Some people absolutely love it, you and I.
Yes,
and we look for that cognitive bias of, if somebody's saying, well, it's good because of this, we're like, yeah, it's good because of this. But then somebody else will say, well, actually, it's not good because of X, Y, and Z, or utility, or whatever they say. So yeah, I feel like it's an interesting space. I think there's obviously use for it. You know, some of the projects, another project I've invested in is like Veracity, which again, what I try and do is look at like the white paper, look at what it's trying to do. So that's trying to get rid of like ad fraud, for example, which is obviously a big thing. But then again, you are literally banking on like a startup or somebody on Twitter.
It's basically investing in a brand new startup.
Yeah, literally. And you know, I had like a big pump. I invested in a meme coin. Don't invest in meme coins, anyone, by the way. But I thought when Doge goes up, a lot of the meme coins follow. So I put £100 into this coin and it went to like 1,600 quid. And I was like, wow, like brilliant, holiday sorted kind of thing. But again, that was luck. But I know I could also present that as in, I'm now a crypto expert. Look, I just got a 16x on my money, for example. So just be careful where you get information from. I'm still invested in it. I've dollar cost.
How much is your holdings, if you don't mind that shit?
Minus. So I probably got just under 100 grand in crypto, but I'm down. I'm like down 60-70%.
If let's say if all of them do reach the all-time high, how much would that be worth?
Yeah, I'll be like multi-millionaire.
Yeah,
because I've invested loads like into it. So XRP is like my biggest holding. It depends where you'd sell as well, because I think with XRP, because it's just been stagnant for ages,
people are saying it might turn into a stable coin, this and that. But
well, it feels like a stable coin at the minute.
It does, but I feel like it will kind of the Swiss kind of system, it will kind of take over that, and if it does, you know.
Anyway, and
exactly.
So I think again, it depends on where I am in my journey. So I was saying to the missus, I was like, if XRP, let's say, gets this $6 or $7, right? At this point in time, I probably wouldn't need to cash out on it, but I'd probably just take my initial investment out. So I'd sell a certain amount of it. Whereas 6 months ago, before like our projects were moving, because we had a bit of standstill on some projects, I would have probably cashed out if it had happened. So it depends on my time frame. Some of them, when I look at what their all-time highs were or how big they can get based on supply, basic tokenomics, I'm not an expert on none of that stuff. Literally, like one of them could make me like 1.8 million if it hits like close to the dollar mark, and I've invested very low in it, and I've been staking it, and you get like 20%, 18.25% staking. But I've also lost thousands. Like some projects, I put 2 or 3 grand in, and they're dead. Like literally nothing. They're not going to come alive. It's just like a flat line. So yeah, I always say, if you're going to invest in crypto, invest money, you know, you can afford to lose. Because it's been like, I'll say 2 years now, I can't remember the exact timescales that I invested in them. I've kind of just put that to the back of my mind now. Like my portfolio is there. I'm hoping one day it comes up, and then, you know, there'll be a lot of money there.
I think that's the exact kind of thought process I have with it. I tell the boys that, look, I'm going to come back to my portfolio in 2030.
That's it.
And we'll see what happens. It's either going to be zero, or it's either going to be millions.
Exactly. It'll either be a good YouTube video, or, you know,
or it could be, definitely. And I think talking about YouTube, you love doing YouTube as a hobby. What's your kind of main purpose with it? For me, it's like documenting my journey. So when I see it in the 10 years time, I can kind of show that this is how I started. My kids can learn from it as well. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. How about you?
So I just love like the creative element of YouTube. So as you know, when you create a YouTube video and we talk to a camera and we're trying to get our words right, and it probably takes, you know, 30 minutes to do a 3-minute video, when I can then manipulate it afterwards through editing and make it actually sound a bit more exciting, I love that process of it, like the creative side. And then also, if there's anything I can share in that message that will help somebody, like buy a house. Like I get so many messages, I've been able to buy a house, or I was able to refinance, or I learned this from your channel, which has saved me thousands. That's the best feeling. My problem with YouTube though is I feel like my channel is solely towards property. and I want to diversify. So I spoke to you like just before today. I released a video that I spent so long editing, and I felt like I put great tips in there, you know, from us starting our own business as well, and it just didn't go anywhere. It just flopped. It almost had like a flat line compared to your typical videos, and it's really disheartening, and that affects me a little bit because I'm like, I spent so much time on it. I'm like, if somebody just clicked this, it'll actually help. So I'm struggling now with YouTube. Do I start another channel? But then you know how hard it is to build up a channel and do all that.
I've tried it. Like building this podcast channel is going to be a long way as well. So
it's
mentally,
stressful. And so I'm having that same dilemma because I don't know this. I try to watch enough Mr. Beast videos to try and understand this, because I'm like, if I release a video and say my audience of 20,000 don't watch it straight away because they're only interested in property, will that then tell YouTube that this is a crap video?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. So sometimes I'm like, should I just release it on a brand new blank canvas? Don't know the answer to it.
I think I'll do a quick YouTube conversation here. But so I've kind of learned from Ali Abdul's part-time YouTube Academy and stuff. And so one important lesson I learned from him is that you can't make the same thumbnails as Mr. Beast, because those thumbnails are targeted to kids.
Right.
So you know how sometimes we try and every video you will see on thumbnails, they will say, make a big face, bring it closer, big text. You don't have to, because everyone's doing that. How are you going to differentiate yourself? How are you going to bring a vibe? How are you going to target your audience? So it's those small things which, when I think back and I realize that is it. That's all I need to do different. I don't need to copy Mr. Beast. I don't need to copy Graham Stephan. I don't need to copy anyone doing that. I just need to be something different. And I think the best example I always keep giving is Ali Abdul. Like if you go check his thumbnails, they literally don't have big faces. They are not those most clickable ones. But when you see it, it's different. And that's what makes you click it. And the first most important thing which Ali Abdul focuses on is the title. And I think title is... I think
title is somewhere I'm struggling at the minute.
What was the title of that video?
So I've changed it this morning because I started panicking. But it was top 10 business tips, top 10 tips when starting a business. But then what I realized is those videos have been out for 20 years on YouTube.
I think if you just flip that around to like, what's the video about?
10 tips on business. So what I did is I got 10 entrepreneurs and took their famous business quotes, and I just spoke about those essentially.
I think if you went from like a perspective of how these 10 tips made me a millionaire, or how these tips, because the thing is, I understand how sometimes you don't want to go with clickbait. The typical clickbait thing, but I think if you're a millionaire and you just add the word millionaire, you're 10 times more likely to get a click on that picture, on that thumbnail as well. So I think that's something I'm learning as well. I'm trying to get to that millionaire status quickly so I can use all my videos.
I'm the same. Wouldn't it be great if we were billionaires? But I did change it to don't start a business today. Don't start a business until you watch this. So it's not actually SEO wise in terms of like saying 10 or tips or anything. But then what was funny when I did that, and I used TubeBuddy. I'm not sure how great it is. I've always used it.
Use TubeBuddy Legend Package A/B testing.
Really good. Okay, really I'll have a look into that.
A/B testing will basically automatically get people to like, you have two thumbnails, you upload one and second one, and it will switch around, and then in 14 days time, if you can set the duration, it will tell you which one performed better. Wow. So then you can put that. It even does it for title as well.
Okay, because I don't think I got the legendary one, but I got the one just below that. So
I think the legendary one is £29 or dollars, but I think
it's worth it because that's the most important thing. So yeah, I will do that, because that title that I put on this morning before I came here, because I was really upset with my video. Alex Hormozi had the same title, but obviously he's got a huge profile.
He's got a huge thing, and I've been studying deeply Alex Hormozi, Ali Abdo, these two guys. I've been studying and trying to go into as much detail and route as possible. For the last 2 weeks, I've been just trying to do that. And just yesterday, I was like, yes, I finally figured out my niche. Because niching is so important. As they say, riches are in the niches.
Of course.
Niching is so important, and all those stuff. It's just small things which kind of matter. And I think one thing also, I've started looking at YouTube more as a business, because I did think that, I should just make videos. I enjoy this and that, which is great. I'm still making videos I enjoy doing, but I have to put this mindset of like, okay, how do I want my brand to be perceived by other people as? And so if I'm just going to make a video every single time, sometimes if your personality is out of the roof and you're just like, I don't know, Logan Paul or KSI, people will love you for who you are. But when it comes to like business type videos, it's really hard to break through. And that's why I've started to more look at it as a business. And so
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I might do that.
Yeah. But other than that, I think you're doing amazing in terms of how you grow your channel. Yes, it's solely based on property. And I think that's why your niche is really small as well to the people you can attract. But I think you're doing a great job.
The CPM's good, or the RPM, whatever it is.
Yes, I'm at CPM, RPM.
Yeah, it's one of them. One of them's like, it's good for property. I think what I found, I could spend, say, 8 hours on a video, like this business one. I spent about 8 hours editing it, and it got like 200 views. Then I could literally, I'm not exaggerating, spend 25 minutes getting a couple of news articles speaking about the property industry, and then that would get like 15,000, 20,000 views. Yeah. And then I'm like, the easy way out would then be just to keep making those videos.
But that's the trap.
Exactly.
That's the trap.
And then what happens with that is if I follow that, then I'm just chasing the money and I'm actually losing the love of interest. YouTube. So I will still keep releasing these 200 view videos because I know my loyal 200 people will always just watch anything that I put out. And hopefully, if it can help them with a business, it'll help them. So,
and I think the reason why it's a trap, because as a content creator, you and myself, we want to do the stuff which get the views, but in the long run, you will hate yourself for doing that because you will just not like the audience you've grown. It's not even loyal, this and that. So all those stuff can really kind of matter when it comes to growing audience as well. But the reason why I want to talk about YouTube, because I also want people to know that starting a YouTube channel, how many videos have you got?
Oh, it's 500 plus.
500 plus. Yeah. And so people think starting a YouTube is easy as well.
That's my second channel as well. My first one had about 300 as well.
Wow.
I had a fitness one back in the day.
So this is just kind of showing why when it comes to even growing anything, whether that's property, crypto, or YouTube.
Your TikTok, I remember was it 700 videos, something crazy?
900 and something before I gained a million. There you go. Because most people think, he got lucky, he blew up overnight. But you didn't see.
You studied it, like you were studying it. Because I remember even the first podcast we had, you were, I can't remember, like 30, 40,000 or something. Yeah. Like it wasn't a huge amount. Like you were doing really well. Yeah. Like much better than myself. But then all of a sudden I could just see it, because what you did is you had banger after banger after banger. You'd almost just found what works.
Because I found it and I just doubled down on it.
Yeah.
It was great, but at the same time, do I really... Like at this point, I'm saying I go into the trap. I started making videos just for the views, this and that, which was great. I got a lot big sponsorships, this and that. Yeah. But I guess.
But what you did well, and I think better than most people, is you pivoted very quickly to YouTube. Yeah. And that's what I've managed to do. So I'm seeing a lot of property people or whatever industry, they'll blow up their TikTok and then they try and move people. I was moving people in directly from the start. My goal was always YouTube. I didn't care for TikTok. If I'm being like fully transparent, it was always, here's 3 tips. If you want to learn the next 3, you've got to watch my YouTube video or follow to learn more.
That's exactly how it was.
And then that worked. So actually, there were some months I was getting like 1,000 subs, which is big for my YouTube, just based off like a TikTok video. And I was like, now it's working. Because I was just using it as kind of like free advertisement. Funnel, funnel, essentially.
That's exactly what I used to do. And now I stopped doing it, but I need to get back into the habit of doing that. But I think what I realized that rather than using that audience, I was just like, okay, now let me try and figure out how YouTube works. And I'm a really nerd when it comes to understanding the algorithm, small things. So it's like, I enjoy that process.
I love it. Yeah. So many videos I'm watching on that and you're just learning stuff and tweaking it. Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, I'm overdoing it, but it's just fun. Yeah. It's just fun. But I want to move now to the 7 deep Inspired Mind questions, which I love to get the answers from people because they're always interesting for me. So the first question is, what's the best piece of advice you have ever got?
Oh, that's a great question. I should have revised this before I came. I've had so many like amazing pieces of advice. I'd probably say, actually, this might surprise my dad actually, just some of the lessons that my dad taught me. So it's not one particular quote, but he always taught me certain principles to live by. And I've always had this in the back of my head for anything that I've done. And it was just always to be honest. And actually my mom comes into it as well. So it's always to be honest, never do harm to anyone. And my mom always taught me, if you can help someone, just help them. Like those kind of 3 principles. Yeah. And now, like when I do anything, and obviously I'm on social media, they follow me on social media, for example, there's always a thought in my head of what would my dad think or what would my mom think? And that kind of underlines everything that I do. So it's very easy, especially in my industry, to sell out. You know, I could easily sell my program to more people by just fabricating it and lying, but it would go against those principles. So I'd probably say, yeah, it's not one quote, but those, and I cheated a little bit there, but that's probably what I'd say.
I think the one thing I love about you is that, let's say you do property videos, you don't still just make the good things about property. You still let people know the bad side and kind of tell them that, look, this is how it is and everything. Because I think most people, sometimes in the past, I've done this myself. I'll just show the good side, because I know that will want people to do this, and in return, it will be good for me. I can grow my channel, grow my income, this and that. But I think that's something I've learned to kind of do now, is that show them both sides and let them choose.
Absolutely.
And I think that will make a lot more. In the long run, it will help you a lot more. And also, my next question is, what's the worst piece of advice you have received? So you can answer that, and then I want to kind of add one more thing to that.
Okay, the worst piece of advice. That's an interesting question. So I always think you can learn something from every single person.
Yeah.
So whether they say something wrong or whether they say something right, you can learn either not to do that or to do that. In terms of worst advice, it was actually to invest in property. This has just come in my head actually. So I was at a party, I'm not going to say who it was. And it was a landlord who had invested in property for, let's say, 40, 50 years. And we were drinking. It was at one of my friend's celebrations. And he actually told me specifically, don't invest in property, which I found really odd. Because although I'm saying don't invest in property right now, or it's probably not the best time, I'd still always advocate that somebody owns some level of property or real estate, because they're not making any more land and it's wealth at the end of the day. So I found that strange. But then again, as you grow up through life, you realize not everyone has your best intentions. Sometimes there's a great quote, people want to see you do well, but never as well as them.
Yes.
And I always kind of aligned it to that person. I'm not saying that's what the person did. We all, we were 3 drinks in, but luckily I ignored that advice, because that was actually when I was going through the property courses, and I was really enthusiastic because the conversation arose, what are you doing? I was like, I'm going to get involved in property. And he was like, yeah, I probably wouldn't do that. I'm thinking, but you made all your money from property. Like, why are you telling me not to do it? And again, I don't know the full context behind that, but that's probably the only answer I can think of.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great answer. And the thing I wanted to add on top of that was that in the first one, how you mentioned that your parents gave you the best piece of advice. Yeah. Typically, your parents give you the best and the worst piece of advice. So I always look at it in the perspective, like my dad has given me the best advice, which I follow till date, but at the same time, the worst. So for example, don't get on TikTok.
Yeah.
Don't do this. Don't do that. Which is understandable where they come from the sense of security. But moving on to the third question. What motivates you to work hard?
Again, it goes back to seeing my siblings, my foster siblings. I think seeing my parents as well, like how hard they worked. Again, I come literally from nothing in terms of a financial perspective. So there's an element of wanting to change the trajectory for my family, for my bloodline. A lot of people speak about generational wealth or, creating a better future. That's always been inherently within myself. My younger brother is 9 years younger. I want his life to be easier than mine. I want my kids. I want his kids. I want everyone who comes after me to have just a head start, not start on the bottom of the staircase, maybe start on step 3 or 4. That's always kind of been my thing. And also there's no better satisfaction, especially because I grew up quite lazy, in terms of working hard. I always use the gym as an analogy. There's an element of, you can see the work somebody's put in when, they take the top off, for example, or they're lifting weights, for example. And I find that kind of motivates me in terms of like business. I'm like, one day somebody's going to look at Health Excel, and let's say in 5 years' time, it is still where it is. You could argue, did you really put the work in? Did you really hustle as hard as you said you were going to hustle? So there's an element of just trying to progress and just trying to prove myself that it's possible. If that makes sense.
I think that will resonate with a lot of people as well, because that's just like, I want to build wealth that no one in my family ever has to worry about money. And
just take that problem away from them.
Exactly. And it gives them more sense of freedom. Like, do what you want to do. Obviously, there's bad things which come with that as well, like they become lazy, this and that. But at the same time, it's just like one step ahead they can start. So I think that would definitely resonate. I want to add one question here, which will not be part of this. But because you mentioned Health Excel, of all the businesses you run or side hustles you do, what's your favorite one?
Health Excel. By a long way. Yeah, I'm glad you actually asked that, because the wife would have told me off for not mentioning it. But it is our passion project. It's something that, if you know my story, obviously my wife's a pharmacist. It's always about helping people physically and mentally. I always thought, because I gave up a really well-paid job in London when I was working there to become a social worker. So when we had my foster siblings, I was like, I want to be a social worker. I want to change the world. I don't want kids to ever be, struggling in life. Became a social worker, realized very, very quickly you can't change the system the way it's designed. So then that element of like, how can I impact the world? So then I started a podcast, and I started doing all these different things. And I think with Health Excel, the beautiful thing with it is we've got this 3 blends at the minute. We're in the process of creating more blends now, that when people have it, it actually improves their physical and mental well-being.
I've had it, so I know.
Thank you. And there's ingredients within that. And even recently we had like a review, and it was like of a girl with her dad, and like how they take it together, and how he's doing stuff now with his body that he couldn't do. My mom, she's in cancer remission. She takes one of our blends, the turmeric blend, religiously, and she's like, it helps with the inflammation. She's got arthritis in her hands. That feeling of knowing I don't have to personally be there, but something we've created is going out there and actually helping someone from a physical and mental perspective. Best feeling in the world. Like, I can't explain. That's better than me like making loads of money on a property flip or getting a viral video. I still haven't had a viral video on YouTube, so maybe one day. But I truly believe like that's purpose and legacy for me. So I think if I had to, get rid of everything else, I'd probably just focus solely on that.
I think Health Excel, the way you just described it, it's exactly like a thing which describes you as well. And so it kind of represents, you want to do it as a business, but it's more on the impact. I think that's where you get fulfillment in running a business, and you might have found the best business which in your lifetime you'll probably run. So I think I do see it doing amazing in 5 years time, because you said if it stays, no, it's not gonna. I know it's definitely gonna be definitely gonna be there, and I think you're already making a lot more progress. I've been seeing your wife's videos as well, and your videos, and once again, I've taken it by myself.
Thank you.
I'm a very lazy person, but because I'm young, I'm saying this, but by the time I'm a bit older, I will realize that I need to start taking it more consistently as well. So I think that's me definitely going to Health Excel first. By the way, there's no way I'm sponsored to talk about this. I just know it's a good product. I've had it as well. My brother has had it as well. And my mom has actually had it as well. Because I used to give it to her as well. I think it's the pink one.
Red one.
Berry
Boost,
Berry Boost, yes. That's the one I've had as well. Moving on to the next question, which is, what is your definition of success?
That's a great question. So me and my wife always talk about this. We always do this like personal development drives. So we were driving.
I literally one day want to have my other half just to talk about this, because I think it's so therapeutic in a way. You're just able to talk. But yes,
honestly, literally every time we commute. So we drove down last night, and what we do is we always have like this like relationship theory kind of thing, and we were always talking about random stuff. So success was actually one that I asked her the question. For me, success was, I'm probably not going to articulate this that well, but think about when you were a young kid. When you're a young kid, you're fearless in terms of like your ambitions, the things that you can do. You believe you can do anything. I thought I was going to be the heavyweight boxing champion of the world. I thought I was going to be an actor. I thought I was going to be a footballer. And the opinions of other people didn't matter. Like, you're never told you can't do this or you can't achieve this. You just think you're very ambitious. You're happy in your thoughts, and you chase the stuff that you really want to do. And you work for that. And I think for me, success is like, especially now as I feel like I'm becoming more successful, it is that ability of resonating with my younger self. Am I now being true to my younger self? Yes, okay, I can't be a footballer because I'm too old and obviously I'm not good enough. However, am I doing stuff that I'm fearless about, and I don't care about the opinions of other people, and I'm ambitious enough about, and I truly believe I'm doing that. Like, I don't have an alarm clock. I've been through the 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m. clubs. I've done all of those. I literally don't put an alarm clock on. And I believe the reason I do that is, obviously I understand the importance of sleep. My hours are all over the place, but it's almost a reminder that when I wake up every morning, I've hit some level of success, that I don't need an alarm clock now or someone telling me. Now, I'll still wake up after 5.5 hours. I'll still be up at 6:30, 7, whatever it is. But that instantly reminds me, you've done something in your life which is quite successful. And then what I have the privilege of doing is, on a daily basis, I can choose what I want to do. Like, I have that flexibility. So I think that's some level of success. There was a great quote, sorry to keep going on, but Joe Rogan, it was just a quick clip on TikTok, and it was something about the worst thing that can happen to a man is meeting the version of the person they could have become.
It was Joe Rogan, or maybe I saw a podcast clip, is that when you meet the person you could have become.
And Milet talks about it a lot as well. So, and that really resonated with me as well, because we know how much potential we have, and we speak about, should we focus on one thing? Should we do this? And to be able to see that future version of yourself and realize I just didn't meet what I could have potentially met. That's a scary thought. But I always try and look at it more lighthearted in terms of like the younger self, when, you know, you believe that you can do anything, and then you go through school, your parents, your siblings, whoever it is, somebody in your life is going to tell you can't do something or you're not good enough. And then that can just stop you. Yeah. So yeah, just try and get that kid back and work towards that.
I think that's a really nice answer, because success for many people, like who are not in this entrepreneurial world, just means money.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
I don't think I mentioned money.
Yes, that's definitely not the case. So that will definitely not make sense, but give people an understanding of what really success is. The next question is, what was the hardest moment you have ever faced in your life?
Okay, so maybe one day we'll talk about this on the podcast, you and I, because I'm actually going through probably the hardest moment of my life right now. Not something that I'm going to disclose now just for personal reasons. So one for the future. Meeting number 3 with you, which would be great. But I'd say the other hardest thing that I've been through is grief. I think I realized after 26, I just started losing people in life. As you get older in life, people are obviously going to pass away. And there was a period I lost like between 10 and 15 people. And I wasn't used to losing people. So for the first 25 years, you know, I lost like a grandparent, but I was a little kid, so you didn't really feel it.
Yeah.
I think when you lose people, your perspective of life just massively changes.
Yeah.
And especially when it's like a shock, like when you're not expecting someone to lose, you lose someone. So I lost my uncle during COVID. He was like my elder brother. He was like a father figure. He was pretty much everything to me. So that really knocked me back. And I think that's when I really struggled personally with like mental health and stuff. So, you know, a message to anyone, as cliche as it is appreciate the people, because you genuinely have no idea how long someone's going to be around for. And I don't wish grief on anyone, but it is a really, really tough thing. But at the same token, there's always a lesson.
Yeah.
And my lesson is, you know, I know how proud he would be. I know he's always watching down. He always believed in me. And it's kind of like inspires me even more to like do more, because it's almost like I'm showing you like how great I'm going to be, if that makes sense. So there's always like, I always try and take a lesson from it. But yeah, I just think grief is it's horrible. You know, I'm sure everyone's gone through that.
And I think, well, I say fortunately, I haven't faced that much yet. And it's part of life that's going to be with me someday. But I think knowing from your perspective, it definitely helps me and the people listening as well to kind of appreciate the moment with the people you are as well, rather than always trying to achieve the next thing, which I used to do a lot.
Honestly, you got to, because especially in this space, you could go 6 months and you're like, I haven't met my best friend, or I haven't seen my brother, for example.
The worst thing I feel every single day, even till date, is that I make a lot of money, but I spend less than an hour with my parents because I'm always working, which is great, but at the same time, which is not great, but at the same time, it's so hard, because like, what should you focus on? This or that and this and that. So I try and make as much time as I can to spend with them, but it's just difficult. And I think that's why I need to kind of learn more to balance with them, at least. So, because I know time is limited for everyone.
It is. I'll just give you, it's not a piece of advice. It's my perspective, and it's something a good friend of mine told me a while ago, is when you're in entrepreneurial space, work-life balance, or this balance that we're all after doesn't exist. And I think the moment you accept that it doesn't exist, there's always going to be a sacrifice. There's always going to be something that falls slightly by the wayside. I think the key then is to make sure it doesn't fall too much by the wayside if it's important to you. If it's not important to you, that's fine. But for example, like even with our relationship, we have to make a conscious effort to have a date night. Even though we sit together for 6 days a week, sometimes we're not conversating. We're not seeing how the other person is, for example. But you step away, like today, after today, Winter Wonderland, we're going to do lots of stuff for the next 24, 48 hours.
You're staying in London?
Yeah, we're staying in London for 2 days. So I thought
nice.
We'll have our time, because it's just been non-stop, you know, with Black Fridays, orders and all that sort of stuff, like just non-stop. So I think, just make sure it doesn't fall too much, but don't be so hard on yourself, because you'll never find that balance. And remember, that intrinsic motivation you have of wanting to do it bigger and better, wanting to leave that generational wealth, won't come if you spend 18 hours with your parents and 1 hour working, unfortunately. So it's just kind of one of those things. But I think parents, you know, they want the best for you. Yeah. Sometimes it is just a matter of sitting with them for an hour, but being present. Yeah. So not sitting with them and thinking about something else.
And it's also is the quality of time rather than the quantity of the time, which I kind of started realize that, okay, I might not be spending 18 hours with them, but like 1 hour I spend equals to like 4 or 5 hours I would spend rather with them. I'm in the present with them, not on my phone and just bothering and doing stuff.
Doing TikToks.
So moving on to the next question. By the way, that really helped me as well. Moving on to the next question. What's the biggest regret in life? Your biggest regret?
That's a great question. So the cliche answer people always give is there's no regrets,
There's
right?
no regrets.
There's always a lesson. But
every single person here has said that.
Yeah. See, I actually spoke about this on the podcast that we're shooting because I was like, there's loads of regrets. Like, you can still learn a lesson without having to go through it. At least that's what I believe. That's why I try and, even like when I educate people, I'm like, don't make the same lesson as me. You'll save yourself money and heartache. I think my biggest regret is I'm too trusting in terms of people. So in my industry, if I shake someone's hand and they say they're going to do something, I just assume that, your word is bond. A bit like how my dad always taught me about respect. If you say you're going to do something, make sure you do it. Be honest, for example. And I realized it's quite upsetting when you go into an industry where values are just words on Instagram posts and they're not actually actions. So some of my biggest regrets is getting into deals with people where, true story, when we started Health Excel, we actually started it a little bit late, 12 months late. And if we had launched it when we did, it would have actually been just in time for the pandemic, which I know sounds bad, but the market was booming then for our product. But we actually started it late because I got into bed with the wrong partner, basically I didn't lose money. I had 100 grand into the deal, which I needed, and essentially had investors on board. It was a big project. And what I had to do is we sold our house. So we had to sell our house to pay our investor back because this investor was basically messing us around. Sold our house, moved in with the in-laws, which again, from an Asian perspective, is like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be, again, there was no like stigma from our family or anything, but from the outside world. So that was quite difficult to do. I had to move in with the in-laws into the spare room. And then we had to rebuild again. Thankfully, I got my money out because at the same time, my profile started to grow on social media. And then it was a matter of, I could leverage that. If you guys don't pay me back, I'll put it out. I'll expose you essentially. So, but imagine if I never had that there, I would have been in trouble. So I think, just be conscious of who you do deals with. Sometimes you don't have to.
Have you ever lost money, like a big amount?
Loads.
Because last time we spoke, you were building a few houses.
Yeah.
Is that still going?
Yeah, so we're 95% done on 2 of our new builds. And the other one, the planning was so long. It's taken 18 months for planning. But we're building 20 units on our other site as well.
20 units,
yeah,
wow.
So in 24 months, I'd have built 22, 23 houses if I don't take any more projects on. But thankfully, I've found the right partners now. So yes, that regret sucks. And I do regret going into bed with certain people. Yeah. But I've landed on my feet now. I've got the right people around me. So just be careful. Do due diligence on people. You haven't always got to do a business just because you like someone. There's always that tendency. And if you like someone, we should do something together.
I think I'm a victim of that as well. If I am sitting with someone for like a few hours and I like what they're saying, this and that, and then you kind of trust person, and then after working with them, you realize, holy crap, this person.
Different.
Yeah, different. Yeah. Completely.
So my word of advice on that, if I may, is if you're going to get into, say, business with someone, I always say this to people, throw a spanner in the works. And what I mean by that is make a problem or talk about a problem, because it's only when problems occur you see somebody's true colors. Yeah. So for that particular project, when we got a problem with the lender, all of a sudden they were like, we're not paying the investor back. And I was like, hold on a minute. I've given my word that I'll pay my investor by September. Yeah. And then they just stood there like, we don't have the money. So I had to sell my house.
Wow.
Yeah, the responsibility wasn't actually on me to deliver the project. So I think, if you can throw some level of spanner in the works or some problem, see how that person reacts, because it's all fun when you're making money, right? And things are going well. You're shaking hands, you're having drinks and stuff. But when shit hits the fan, which is something that I've learned a lot of the time, that's when you see people's true colors. Like, is that person still going to stick to the promise that they said they were going to do? Are you celebrating when you win, but then consoling each other when you lose? So just be mindful of that, because again, I'm sure you have many opportunities come your way.
Yeah. And now I've learned to say no as well.
You've got to say no.
Before it was just yes. Every brand deal, yes, without even doing any background research. Of course. And I'm sure sometimes as a content creator, money can be a big thing. Like, oh my Lord, this brand is paying this much, but then you could lose all the reputation in seconds.
Absolutely.
As well. Thank you so much for that as well.
You're welcome.
And moving on to the last question. As you have read 350 books, it's going to be a tough one.
Okay.
What are your top 3 books in the self-development field, or I would say in entrepreneurship or self-development field?
Okay, so I actually knew this was part of the question. I was trying to think of it, and I couldn't do it. So I've read, like you mentioned, I've read over 350
I'll make it
books.
easy. We need 5.
5.
Top 5.
I could do 50 if you want. But what I did think is, there's certain books that have, when I've read them, they've changed the trajectory of my life in terms of I've made a decision there and then that has impacted the rest of my life. So I think a lot of the books, like The One Thing, for example, Atomic Habits, they're all great books. The 4-Hour Work Week, you can take certain aspects from them. But I'd say 3 books that really changed my life is Mindset by Carol Dweck. I think just learning about the growth mindset was really important. That's quite a popular book. The Power of Purpose by Les Brown was an interesting book, because when I read that, I was probably 150 books in or something. I gave up my job on that Monday.
Oh, wow.
I listened to it on Audible on Friday, Saturday. I gave up my job. I was like, there was something in that book about taking control of your life that just resonated with me. I just handed my notice in, and that was it. And then that's when I went full time into property. So thankfully that was a good choice. So I used those 2 as 2 pivot points in my life. And then another one that I thought was really important was The Values Factor by Dr. John Demartini. A great book. And I think if you read that and really sit down with yourself and understand what your values are, because sometimes if you ask someone, what's your values? A lot of people don't know.
Yeah.
Like nobody's really had that question.
I sat down to kind of figure out my values, and I've now made a list of it. Good. Before I had no values.
See, you're ahead of the curve. You're doing amazing things at like such a young age. So you're doing well. But then what you need to do is really, if there are your values, you believe in them, obviously, every decision you then make,
it depends on the values.
Absolutely. So when it comes to a new sponsorship, when it comes to a prospective deal, for example, is this in line with my values? And then that really helped me figure out myself and understand myself. So those are probably 3 books. But yeah, there's so many great books. The Chimp Paradox was a great one. Just understanding psychology in terms of like the chimp in your brain, where we're on emotion, we want something now, as opposed to the computer side, the logical side. So as an investor, I'm more of I try and use the computer side of my brain, delayed gratification in everything I do. I invest now. I don't make a lot of money now, but in the future, it'll pay me, rather than getting that Gucci belt or Louis Vuitton bag or whatever people are spending crazy amounts of money on. I'm like, why are you doing that? Just go buy a house and then thank me in 20 years time.
And I think these books which you just mentioned are definitely going to become part of. There should be 2 more books which I've currently been reading. I don't know if you read the book called Make Time.
I haven't, no.
It's a book I was scrolling on Amazon and suddenly I saw a book with good reviews. I'm like, I haven't been reading for a while.
Yeah.
Let me buy this book. Yeah. While I was buying that book, another book popped up. So I'm like, this looks interesting. Let me buy this as well. So I bought 3 books like that, and I'm currently now getting back into the habit of reading, because I realized there's so much more to learn. And books can help you so much in terms of like, when you get to this question of what is my life? What do I want with my life? My value. That book of values, I would definitely have to read, because as you move towards your 30s, I would say, which I'm still nowhere near, you kind of start thinking like, what do I really want from life? And you start asking those deeper questions, and that's where books will definitely help. So
I'm going to cheat as well, Jatz, if you don't mind.
Go on.
You can take this out, but just 2 more books I think that would help you as well is Principles by Ray Dalio.
Okay.
It's like it's a Bible though. Like it's so long, like even on Audible. Such a great book. Again, similar to like Values Factor, but Ray Dalio, unbelievable investor. But he talks about just principles of life. It's called Principles of Life and Business, I think it is. And then I know we spoke a little bit about mental health previously. One thing I always say is when somebody says, what's the best personal development book to read? What's personal to you? What do you need to improve on? So if it's sales, you got Brian Tracy, for example, who might really help you. If it's communication, you got How to Win Friends. Yeah, those kind of books. Yeah. But there was a great book, I think it's by Dale Carnegie, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. That book massively changed my life, because all it does is it breaks down scenarios when we overthink stuff in the world. And there's a great exercise in there. So if anyone's anxious, for example, I use this one. It's a bit like the Dr. Pepper advert. What's the worst that could happen? Kind of thing. It just reminds me of the Dr. Pepper ad. So when I'm in a situation and I'm overwhelmed or things are going bad in a property, I write down what's the worst that could happen. So piece of paper, the worst thing that could happen is, even though it's not directly related, my parents could die, for example. Morbid. I know that sounds crazy. Yeah. Then it's like something happens. Yeah, extreme. But then once you start writing all this stuff and then you get to like, okay, I might lose £2,000, for example, or the project might be 6 months late, whatever. That becomes so insignificant because you've started at such an extreme. So what that book does, it breaks down loads of different stories into examples. So if anyone suffers with anxiety or worry, Great book as well. So yeah, I'm cheating. I told you I could literally list all 350.
I mean, I think I will definitely need a list of good books to read. So this is even better for me as well. And I think one lesson, if anyone can take from this entire podcast, is to read books. I kid you not, it is the most amazing thing I'm doing at the moment in my life. I take my first hour of the morning and I just read.
Yeah.
And it helps me so much throughout the day as well. Allows me to feel a bit smarter compared to these guys as well. But last question, which is not part of this question, is where did the name The Anxious Investor come from? Because you reminded me, because you said if you feel anxious, and I'm like, oh yes, The Anxious Investor. So where did the name come from?
It was a bit of luck, to be honest. Because I remember my property one was actually first it was called Property Ventures, which was my limited company for one of my HMOs. Then I called it like No BS Property, but it looked like Knobs Property. I was like, that's not really a good look. And then, I don't know, then before I went on TikTok, I was like, I need something a little bit catchy. And I was like, I'm an investor, but I want to talk about anxiety as well. Like one of the things I want to push more out is mental health. Like I've always been an advocate of that. So I was like, anxiety, investing. And then that's literally, I was like, well, I could be the anxious investor. And then what I realized is, a lot of the common questions I get asked about property is people's anxiety, because you're spending a lot of money. Yeah. It's most likely one of your biggest purchases in life. So I was like, people are always anxious about it. So it almost had like a double barrel meaning. So yeah, that's essentially how it happened. And it sounds a lot better than Knobs Property, doesn't it?
Definitely. Yeah. But I think maybe one day it could turn into your actual name.
Possibly. You never know. Well, actually, I did laugh. I did say, as I'm growing older, one of the things I want to do is become the lazy investor, in terms of I almost want to, like, because I was a project manager by trade, is get the right people around me where I can just be lazy and not have to do all that work. Yeah. But in order to get anywhere in life, as you know, you've got to put that work in initially.
Yep, 100%. And I think that's I'm looking forward to that phase of your
enjoy it, man. You're doing amazing. You're doing amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And it was a great podcast.
Thank you.
A lot of value for me. I always say this thing, and I'm going to say again, is that on this podcast, I do it more for myself, and people will learn. If I can learn something, there's definitely something they can learn as well. So there was a lot of values you have dropped in this podcast. And guys, if you don't know who The Anxious Investor is, all the links to his social media will be in the description box below, and on Spotify or Apple Podcast. I don't even know if you can add it somewhere, but it's basically The Anxious Investor on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. So yeah. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. And leave a review as well for the podcast. Helps us out.
Please. That's one thing I'm going to start doing, is please leave a review if you enjoy the podcast. And I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, brother.